Thank you for your interest in the P2000 panel simulator. The tool which is provided to you is called panelsimulator.exe, and this tool will give you the ability to simulate a P2000 or a card key CK721A panel and associated readers on a P2000 server as if you had physical hardware. So before you go ahead and run the panel simulator, the first thing you're going to want to do is capture the IP address of the machine that you're using. This is so that you can configure the panel simulator to point to the correct P2000 server. Once you've launched the panel simulator, and this is an executable that will be provided to you on request, you need to enter the IP address of the host. Now once you've done that, you're now able to go ahead and configure panel simulator to define what ID ranges of the child hardware you want. So for example, if you want 4 reader terminals, you probably want to have an ID range of 1 through 4. If you want to simulate badges, you're going to want to define which badge numbers you want to use and what range. The panel simulator will simply cycle through them. So once you've gone ahead and set those configurations to your liking, keeping in mind that this is, again, hardware you're going to need to still set up on the configuration of P2000, you just go ahead and set that configuration up, and at that point you're pretty much ready. Now you still, as I said, need to configure this in P2000 system configuration. To do that, go ahead and add a panel. You can call it whatever you want. Typically, if it's a simulated panel, we'll call it simulated panel. And the IP address of this panel is going to be the same as the P2000 server. Why? Because this is where the panel simulator is running from. Clearly, if you're running panel simulator from a different IP address, that's the one you'd want to put in there. So once you've gone ahead and configured the panel itself in P2000's system configuration using the appropriate IP addresses, you're pretty much good to go to simulate the panel. Now, one word of warning here: if you've configured the panel that you've added in P2000 as something, say, with firmware 3.1, you need to make sure the panel simulator is also configured to use that firmware 3.1. And that was that configuration screen you saw earlier. Now, moving forward from that, if you want to simulate hardware module traffic, which is like an RDR2SA, you need to configure and define those in P2000 as well. And this is where that addressing scheme comes in. So remember when we had configured panel simulator, use addresses 1 through 4 for the terminal modules? Well, that's what we're doing here. We're defining a terminal 1, 2, 3, and 4. So once you've defined your hardware module in P2000, this is also going to be a place for you to add those readers as well, which you've done from these configuration screens. You're now at a point where the panel simulator can simulate alarms for the panel, alarms and traffic, such as door opens and access grants and denies for the readers, messages for the hardware modules. But what's still missing is the inputs and the outputs. So again, panel simulator has the ability to simulate both input and output traffic, and that is something else that you're going to want to configure from the P2000 configuration screens. As you see in the example presented to you, what we're doing right now is we're configuring the second hardware module, which will be representative of the associated readers as well. So the IDs that you configure in panel simulator, if you have readers 1 through 4 and you have terminals 1 through 2, what it's going to do is panel simulator is going to cycle by starting off with the terminal address of 1 and going through readers 1 and 2. And then going to terminal address 2 and cycling through readers 1 and 2. So it just does this constant loop, cycling through those IDs. Now, the other things you're going to want to do, of course, if you want to see some real-time traffic in P2000, is you're going to want to configure some card holders, badges, access groups, and, of course, time zones. And you're going to want to set that all up so that those associations are there. What you're seeing on your screen right now is us adding that time zone. This is absolutely a must to configure an access group and a badge. So we've now got our time zone defined. We will definitely want to make sure it's a valid time zone if you want to see valid access grant messages. And this will make sure that panel simulator is aware of it. The second thing you're going to want to do, of course, is create your access group. So similarly, you're going to now pick those two virtual or simulated terminals that we had defined earlier. We want to add those terminals into the axis group, but give ourselves a nice name for the axis group. And this will ultimately be the axis group that will be used for the panel simulator to simulate transactions against the cardholders. We're going to want to take that axis group and, of course, configure it for the specific badges. So just to recap, what we got here is we have our P2000 controller, our simulated controller defined, the associated two terminals defined. And at this point, we're also now going through and configuring the input and output points. Again, if you don't have these configured when you run Panel Simulator, and if you have those addresses scanning, you're simply going to get a lot of nuisance messages from Panel Simulator saying that the address of that hardware was not found. And you'll see those messages in real-time lists as well. So another good way to do this in reverse is you can always start a Panel Simulator without having configured anything, and real-time list will literally tell you what's missing. So just looking at that, if you've missed anything, real-time list will tell you. You can use that as a way to also define the hardware that you haven't configured. So now we have our inputs configured. It's a good time for us to also a good time to make sure that we also configure our output points. Again, you're going to want to do this for all your terminals if you want to see all those messages. And one of the tricks that you could use is the add hardware feature in P2000 configuration. By using that add hardware feature, it'll save you a little bit of time as it defines some of those defaults for you. So again, here we're configuring output points 1 and 2. If you want to do 4, you could do output point 1, 2, 3, and 4. Just make sure what you create is going to be utilized by Panel Simulator. So at this point, as we build up our output points and we got our associated input points built up as well, we're getting to a point where we're very close to now kicking off Panel Simulator. And I believe we're all set now. So probably a good time for us to fire up Panel Simulator for the first time. Now remember to launch that real-time list, because that real-time list is going to be your guide as to if Panel Simulator is successfully running or not. So here we go. We've already gotten our Panel Simulator configured. The IP addresses are on there. You're going to already see some feedback from Panel Simulator on the left window. It'll tell you if it's connected to the hardware. Again, it's presuming that you have that configured in P2000, so that's that feedback mechanism there. And on the right side of the Panel Simulator window, you're going to see the individual transactions. So as you can see here, real-time list is now showing us valid generating traffic. The blue host messages are telling us what's missing. Okay, and again, you can use this as a good reference point to say, all right, clearly my Panel Simulator is trying to access this output on this output point number, and you either need to